Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those on the East Coast. Welcome to the December 16th, 2015 edition of NAGC's Webinar Wednesday series. This is the last in our series for this fall, and I think you all are going to hear very interesting perspectives from three folks that have come over to the dark side, as our president, John Verico, likes to say, from the lighter side of journalism. And so we've got three fine gentlemen with us. One is the first fellow here on the left is Rob Margetta. Rob Margetta. Rob is a public affairs associate with the National Science Foundation. He came to government in 2015, and he joined us from the world of journalism in Washington, D.C., where he spent 8 years with Congressional Quarterly. Second speaking today is John Fourier. He is he's a spokesman with the Office of Financial Research and came over to government from Reuters 4 or 5 years ago. And then finally, we're going to hear from our longest veteran, Richard McIntyre. He is a public affairs specialist with the USDA, and he has had a long history with journalism as a photojournalist, a reporter, managing editor, and then he was with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and was communications director with the NAACP before coming to Washington, D.C. as a public affairs specialist. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of quick notes. Our Webinar Wednesday series is going to continue with a spring run in 2016. That will be from January to May, and it will continue the third Wednesdays of each month. We will take a break in June for the Communications School, and first up with us will be a gentleman named Spiro Canton, who is the author of Tap Dancing with the Media. He will be speaking on January 20th and continuing our discussion about media, and that will be at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and then thereon across the country. I also want you to remember a few things. Award nominations for the Blue Pencil and Gold Screen competition remain open, and please join in on judging. It's good for the association because we are needing folks to come in and give their opinion on our entries, and it's also good for you. I have found judging to be terrific the last few years. It's given me a really good viewpoint on what other folks are doing. It's gotten me a lot of good ideas. It's given me some professional development opportunity in terms of sort of broadening my own skill set. So I definitely recommend it, and it's a lot of fun, and it doesn't take a ton of time. A couple of days in the spring is all, and it gives you a chance to work with some other communicators as well. You can come in with your own team, or you can volunteer as an individual, and NAGC will pair you up with someone. We still also have speaker slots available for June, although those are closing in, and if you have a keynote recommendation, please feel free to forward that along. And also forward along recommendations for your comrades to join NAGC. We are doing a lot of new things this spring. We're going to be revamping our website. We've got some other professional development opportunities coming along besides Webinar Wednesdays, and so I think it's a really exciting time to join. I think that's it. In terms of logistics, we're going to hold questions until the end since we have three panelists with us today. We're going to hear from each one of them, and then at the end we will take questions. But as always, you can type your questions into the chat box in your viewer, and then we will go through those as we're able. And they're going to keep their comments to about 10, 11 minutes apiece so that we have enough time for questions from folks. I think that we're going to have quite a few of those today. I don't think we have anything else at this point, so we could bring on our friend Rob Margetta. He is going to take over as presenter and talk to us about his perspective. Let me change that over for him. Just give me just half a second here. This is our first time, so you have to bear with us. There we go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm Rob Margetta. I'm a public affairs specialist with the National Science Foundation. I just hit 11 months on the job, and that's coming after about 10 years in DC journalism and about 4 years as a crime reporter in Massachusetts prior to that. It's been a great experience thus far, and I'm looking forward to learning more. So, as I was mentioned, I think I'm the most recent refugee from journalism, I guess you could say, so I'll start talking as someone who recently made the transition. So what have I found that's very similar in public affairs as opposed to journalism? I'm still doing a lot of fact finding. I'm still finding the best and most interesting ways to present those facts. I'm just doing it now within an organization instead of without, and that's been a little bit of a change of pace. A nice one, I should say. Writing and verbal communication skills, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, are still crucial. The idea of trying to boil things down to their essence is still extremely important. It's still a deadline-driven operation. Often that means I have to deal with sort of crisis communications. If I have an urgent inquiry, it means I have to drop everything I'm doing and change my subject or focus. Another skill set that is really important is the ability to sort of balance multiple topics in your head. One of the things I liked most about journalism was that it sort of keeps the brain active. Every day I'd be focusing on something completely different. You have to change gears very fast. You go home very tired as a result, but I loved it. And I find that I get to experience a lot of those same things as a public affairs specialist. So in that respect, I like the job very much. What's different? I think probably the biggest difference is instead of trying to focus on just objective reporting, I'm going to have to say that now that I get to, now I have an agenda behind what I write. I'm trying to promote something instead of just write about it. That's sort of I guess a fundamental shift in how you think, and it's a necessary one, but I've actually found it's a lot easier than I thought it would be. You know, as opposed to whereas a newspaper or any other kind of publication, you find that you typically know who your audience is and also what their agenda is, what they're looking for. Public affairs is a little bit different because you're just trying to put information out to the public. There's many different segments, many different ways they'll use that information, and instead of just blasting out information as you would through a newspaper, you have to think about targeting your products a lot more. And also, if there's one thing, if someone was going from journalism to public affairs and they're saying, what's the biggest change? I'd say, whereas before you'd write something, an editor would take a look at it, maybe another would take a look at it after that, and they say, great, put it out there. Very, very different standard of approval before publication. Things have to go down through several levels to our offices for approval, have to come up, have to go through the editing process, might have to start it all over again. So that's a bit of a change. Why former journalists can help your PR shop. And I can say this because that's a little bit of self-promotion. I know a lot of people who I think would be great working for public affairs. Generally, we have a first-hand idea of what the process is. Not only what deadlines are, how journalists set their schedules, do fact-checking, respond to editorial pressure. We know why these things exist. Deadlines, for example, have gone through a fundamental shift, whereas before there was sort of a 5 or 6 p.m. deadline and your story would come out the next day. Now the internet has changed all that. Deadlines are almost immediate. Most newsrooms are pressuring reporters these days. Get the fact, put it out, and then add to it later. That's changed also things like schedule settings. I know when I came to NSF, one of the things that I noted is that you really, whereas week ahead items were going up on Fridays, most reporters have had to move that back to Thursday. That's when they sit down, they go through what they're going to attend for the next week. They send those notes to their editors, and also I knew that, for example, most DC reporters rely very heavily on the AP and Reuters daybooks. So if you're doing a press announcement where you want to get media there, not only should you contact them directly, you should send your notification to those publications because that's what journalists read. Things like you know, I know sometimes I've gotten this as a journalist. I've gotten sort of feedback from this as a journalist. I've seen it firsthand as a public affairs specialist. There's sort of this idea of, boy, why does this guy have to run with this right now? Why are they really pushing the story? Well, you know firsthand, it might not just be a reporter. He or she might have an editor sort of leaning over their desk saying, I want this take on this story, or I want you to focus on this particular area. Understanding that can help you deal a little bit better with the journalist on the other end. We also have some insight into just what's going on with the journalism market these days. We know that reporters are under a lot of pressure to do much, much more with much, much less in terms of resources than they ever have. Things like when I started journalism, and this is only 15 years ago, there was a night staff. I could say I'm done at the end of the day, and someone else would come and take over at 5 or 6 p.m. Bear in mind, these were local papers. That doesn't exist pretty much anywhere, with the exception of a few publications, a few exceptions, and you probably know who those are, the big guys, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Otherwise, in most cases, if you're talking to a journalist, that person is doing the job that 2 or 3 people would have been doing just 10 years ago. Everything's moved from paper to digital. And they're also not only responsible for larger beats, but they're also responsible now for social media and self-promotion. It's a much, much different world. And so getting somebody recent and sort of making sure you do that every 5 or 10 years can really help understand what's going on specifically in today's newsrooms. Also, this is similar to what I was talking about with when it comes to media announcements. We can actually say, this is something I would have used as a journalist, or this is something I would not have said as a journalist. And now, actually, I want to switch notes and say, because I don't want it to sound too much like a journalist comes in and can really help a PR shop. I have actually been helped tremendously by the public affairs veterans that I'm meeting now. My approach was sort of the same when I came to a newsroom for the first time. Find the person who someone else says is really good at that job and just copy what they do. Learn from them and sort of come in knowing what you don't know. One of the things that I've found has been a little bit of an adjustment is the idea of you're working now in a complex agency. You've got many, many more people watching over what you do, many more levels of approval, and many more layers of production. So just mapping out an agency is something that can take 2, 3, 6 months to do. And once you do that, you can operate much more efficiently. The idea of how to work in a more multifaceted role. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but you're sort of a single-use job in journalism. If you're a reporter, your job might just be to, if you're a Senate reporter, for example, on the Hill, your job might just be to sit in the cloakroom and talk to senators about whatever's happening in the day. If you're an editor, your job is just to edit a certain segment of copy about a certain particular topic. In a public affairs office, I've actually tended to switch roles a little bit more. I've gotten to fall back on some graphic design skills that I haven't used since college. I've gotten to do presentations like these, and I've gotten to do writing for products that I hadn't been able to do before. So it's been very interesting. Also, the idea of forming long-term communication strategies. This is not something that happens in journalism these days. Journalism is not something. It is mostly a day-to-day affair. Again, with a few exceptions from reporters. So one of the things that my colleagues at NSF have done very well is teach me how to think more strategically and longer term. Biggest surprise coming here: how disappointing it can be when journalists don't do what they're supposed to. When a story runs, it mentions your agency in a bad light. They never called to check with you. Extremely disappointing. I know why it happens. I know these people are overworked. I know when they're dealing with a report that deals with 89 agencies, they don't necessarily feel like they have time to contact all of them. Still a bit of a letdown when it happens. Changes in the media landscape. And so this is going back to the idea that journalists are now doing the work of 2 or 3 people. Newsrooms have shrunk. Reporters are younger because they're getting rid of a lot of sort of the institutional memory people who also happen to be the best paid. That means from a PR standpoint, you're going to have to reintroduce yourself a lot more, and you're going to have to understand that the person who's talking to you might not know as much as the person who did, a decade, 15 years ago. This is also now while the news market in general has shrunk, a lot of established publications are now experimenting with targeted content. I'm sure if you follow Politico, you've seen their morning takes and their pro blogs. That's just one example of how people are trying to find new subscribers by tapping into specific subject areas. So while that means if you have a large beat, you may have less coverage. All of a sudden, if you're somebody who represents an agency that deals with something like cybersecurity, you may all of a sudden have 10, 15 reporters that you'd never seen before, very, very interested in what you do. Shifting standards in terms of what's acceptable. As I mentioned before, whereas there was a 6 p.m. deadline when I started, you'd make sure to check all your sources, double check. Sometimes you'd say, well, this just isn't ready to go. Newspapers and other outlets right now are much, much more comfortable posting something and then saying, we'll fix or modify or add to it later, which means, again, if your agency comes up, they're much more comfortable putting an accusation in and then adding your response later. Dramatic increase as social media, not just for the tool for sort of spreading the news, but also a lot of reporters use social media to pick up the news. So if you have an announcement or if you have a quote that you want to get out there, social media is a great way to do it. The media releases that people once relied on, such and such an official said such and such to say about this new award that went out or a new action that the agency took. Putting that up on Twitter is going to be just as good as putting that out to your press distribution list in terms of people seeing it and disseminating it. Also, more online resources for writing. When I started in journalism, it used to be that you'd have to call the press officer at an agency to get any kind of information. They'd be your starting point. Now a lot of that they can find through public records, and it's not just the sort of data-driven investigative reporters doing that. It's kind of anyone who has that capability. I'm going to go through this quickly because I know I'm running out of time. Common ground, I find that just basic professionalism. You know what my job is. My job is to promote the agency. I know what your job is. It's to sell a newspaper. And realizing they're not always going to align, and that's okay. As long as there's a relationship that involves some basic respect, I think everybody can work together. And that involves building relationships based on mutual respect. Also, coffee. Building those relationships, I'm sure a lot of you know, involve meeting with reporters, giving them some background information, context about what happens at your agency. That's going to result in them writing better stories. Feed the reporters who do good work for you, and that doesn't mean just giving them press releases. That means giving them insight into what happens at your agency. And let's see, I think I've hit my 13 minutes, and so I'm going to just say, just finish on the fact that one of the things that I found as a reporter didn't always happen with public affairs officials and is very, very helpful is knowing what journalism standards are, knowing why journalists take certain actions, and if you're going to rebuke a reporter for something, doing it when they've sort of violated some tenet of journalism, when they haven't done their homework, when something is purporting to be objective but is actually subjective, when they sort of haven't taken the time to do what they should. And that's something where you can reach out to editors, not just reporters, and get information about that ahead of time. There are a lot of online resources, pointer.com, some of the New York Times blogs, Eric Wempel's blog, where you can just sort of follow this and find how journalists think. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to John. Thank you very much for your time.
Rob, thanks very much. Well, Rob really teed off a lot of the most interesting parts of our jobs, and so I'd like to thank you for that, and I'd like to thank the NAGC for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I hope you find it interesting and get some insight from all of the speakers. So let me just go. I think Rob touched on a lot of the same points that I will touch on, and hopefully I can get through mine fairly quickly as well. So just on the first subject of the media landscape, my take on it is that, as Rob said, the media right now is, and they always expect, or I can always expect something to occur on the financial services side. I don't. That hasn't been always the case for me, but I will expect a random email from a reporter over the weekend or on holiday or after hours. I do I do understand that reporters, even though they're stressed with, with pressure and time commitments, I do expect them to have their own lives too. So that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. But there's no doubt that I expect something any time of the day or night. So, like I said earlier, I check my messages regularly during off hours. I do whenever I do get messages from reporters, not during the day, I do sort of let them know that if they're looking for something specific, that because it's a weekend or it's evening, I won't be able to get back to them as quickly as they wish. Partly because maybe some of the information they're looking for is not within my grasp immediately, and I have to go find certain people, and some people might be on vacation or they have family commitments. So I remind them of the circumstances that we're under. So as much as Rob sort of alluded to this as well. So as much as I'm trying to promote the Office of Financial Research and all the great research products that we do here in terms of financial stability, I also understand that what I do has to be a service business for the reporters, because they are in the, from my perspective, in the end, our customers and our clients. And so I'm constantly thinking of how can I help them get what they need, that they'll be satisfied, they'll be happy with what we give them. Obviously, they won't be happy with everything that we can provide or I can provide them, but I always tell them unequivocally, I am always trying to get as much information to them as possible, and I say that and I repeat that quite often to them. So, and during those conversations, having been a reporter and not fully understanding the pressures on the other side, now I'm in a position where I can give them the perspective of where I am from the government side. So, like I said earlier, I repeat to them, yes, I am trying to get you the information. I have certain restrictions that I'm facing, but I am trying my best to send that along. It's not something that I can fulfill all the time, but I do try to remember, or at least try to remind them that this is my position, this is where I'm coming from, and try to set that expectation early with them. And during that conversation with them, I try to tell them, I reinforce to them what I know about what they're asking for, what they're seeking, but it also, I have to also reinforce to them, there's some stuff that I just don't know and I can't provide to you, and I try to establish a hard cutoff with them, and then see if there's anything else that they need as a follow-up. And like I said earlier, I try to tell it like it is. I think reporters understand. I think given the sophistication of the news in the world these days, better understanding of where everybody's coming from. They know my perspective, and so therefore I don't hide anything, or I try not to hide anything, and I just tell it like it is, and I think they're sympathetic and empathetic to it. Like I said, I tell them that I'm trying to get them the information as fast as I can, and as fullest to the as I can, and that way I try to set the expectation early, either it's in a phone call or by email or something like that, so they're not surprised by it. And being on this side of the fence, I do have a great understanding and appreciation for the daily pressures that reporters are under, given the fact that the internet has really just changed the media landscape. So I try to keep in mind what their time management and their time pressures are. And Rob talked about this earlier. I come from a wire service background at Reuters. I have I have an understanding of what it is they need. Wire services obviously are different from newspapers, but in the end, given the internet, everything is immediate these days. So and just understanding, what is news to them, when it is news, and when you can understand that, it really helps your relationship and time management with dealing with certain reporters. Like I said, sometimes that, for example, today at 2 o'clock, the Federal Reserve is going to announce their decision on whether to raise interest rates or not at 2 o'clock, and right around now, you would never want to email a reporter, or at least a financial services reporter, or call them, because they're preparing their stories and getting everything ready, coding their stories, doing all the necessary prep work that they need to do. So if you were to call them or try to contact them now, that they would not be happy with you. Obviously, you would only do that when it's absolute emergency, and it has to be a pretty high standard, high level to do something like that. And in terms of working our relationships with them, I feel like embargoes are a good way to do that. I think everybody understands that. It helps you manage your own time with reporters, and it helps the reporters manage their time, and everybody gets along much better that way as well. Like I said yesterday, like I said earlier, timing of the Federal Reserve, statements and events, you always want to sort of plan ahead and make sure you can try to get in the mind of the reporter and find out what is it that they're focused on right now. Are they focused on the Fed? Are they focused on the negotiations on the Hill? If I need to get something to them, when is the best time to do it? And of course, anything that the priorities of your agency or department or office are not always going to align with everything going on externally, but you try to line it up as the best you can. In terms of relationship management, understanding reporters, like I said, you would never want to try to reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to grab coffee at 2 o'clock today, or anything like that. You sort of want to plan out a little bit ahead and find out when is a quiet time for them. Obviously, the best time really for them, or at least for the reporters that cover us, is when Congress is out, and they have less pressure. They at least have one less area to be worried about when Congress is out, and they have more time to either sit down with you over coffee or lunch. I always find face-to-face interactions much better. You get a better sense as to where they're coming from. They get a better sense, from where you're coming from, and it's a good way to sort of just, not be formal over email and just talk about and chit-chat about things, and and just let conversations play out and try to get to know them, where they're coming from, what their pressures are, what they're trying to accomplish. And this is also a good time for you to sort of spell out to them what you're trying to accomplish as well, and what they can expect from you and what you can expect from them. One thing that I always was, one thing that I found useful is in using a sort of an old, your journalism techniques, is when you're having coffee or you're having lunch with the reporters, I always try to, towards the end of the conversation, try to find out from them, what are you hearing about us from your sources, either in industry or on the Hill, or even other circles, you know. So I think that having those face-to-face relationships are good sort of intel building mechanisms that they wouldn't want to share over email, and you wouldn't want to share over email either. And this sort of, don't push too much. This goes back to time management, relationship management. Know when to contact them, know when to sort of push certain ideas onto them. One of our biggest issues is that we have very complicated research items that we need to issue to the public, and some of it I just know will be too difficult for reporters, even financial services reporters who do this stuff every day. It's just going to be too complicated for them. So I try not to push it. I try to flag it for some reporters who have a better understanding or who are more interested in certain items. And I just sort of leave it at that, because I feel like if you just push too much, there's going to be too much of an opposite equal reaction on the other side. And just sort of, you know, like I said, try to feel like what it's like to be in their shoes. You know, if you have an editor telling you have to do this, you have to do that by this time, you can probably understand they have several things they're looking at and watching and monitoring, and you just want to be aware of the fact that they have certain pressures and deadlines and even administrative roles that, you know, tasks they need to do internally, and you should be mindful of those as well. Like I said, internet has really changed everything. It's made reporting a lot more competitive, and there's, I feel like, a lot of pressure for reporters to scoop each other, and I'm mindful of that. And I've only been in my current role for a year, so there isn't a lot of things that we can do on our end to sort of, you know, to help reporters get the scoops that they need every once in a while, but I'm mindful of it. And like I said earlier, you know when to push certain reporters on certain topics, and that's getting to know the reporters and what their backgrounds are and what their interests are. And if they're interested in certain things, you have to sort of admit to yourself you're not going to understand everything that goes on in your own office. So the best thing to do is try to provide a background environment or deep background environment in which they can talk to the subject matter experts in your office and help them through certain issues that will promote your own products. And I think everybody feels better in the end with that. So far, my interactions with the media have been mostly productive. I've only hit on one or two issues so far, and I really sort of I credit that to my background in journalism and dealing with relationships and time management and all the things that I've already talked about. And so so far, knock on wood, this has been a great job. So with that, let me hand it over to Rich and let him present his section.
Hello, is everyone with me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rich.
Okay, stand by. I'm not seeing the presentation for some reason. It was up when you had it up.
Rich, I see some cigars.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I'm trying to figure out, I don't know where the presentation went when you handed it over.
Okay.
You'll just need to use the one on your desktop, Rich. Your own version. Show it from your screen.
Oh, I didn't save it. I'm so sorry for this.
It's okay. Let me show mine. Okay. Can you hand over presentation control to me, and
Yes, I'll do that.
Too?
My true apologies. There you go.
Okay. Hold on. Let me get mine onto where I need to be. Also, there we go. Everybody, just bear with us for a second here. May I go through to Rich's presentation? I don't know where it starts exactly, so I'm just going to scroll through here. we've got a ways to go. Let's try 50. Let's try 54. There we go. Wow, lots of slides. Let's try 70. There we go. All right, Rich McIntyre, you're up.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'll just scroll through as you go, okay?
Very good. Thank you very much. Sorry about that, everyone. Technical difficulties. That happens in this world, of course, of public affairs, and things just happen, and you try to move on. Once again, I am Richard McIntyre. I'm a public affairs specialist here in the Food Safety and Inspection Service of USDA. We are the folks that handle and take care of your meat and make sure that it is safe, wholesome, and properly labeled. As you see there, the screen says, "Can you hear me now?" That is usually the trying to advance the slide. There you go. Very good. Okay, some of the things that I experienced when I first switched over and came over has been at USDA about 5.5 years at the Food Safety and Inspection Service. Some of the things that opened my eyes were the bureaucracy and the levels that I think some of the other folks talked about, particularly in reference how policy and different things are influenced. And that in itself was coming from the other side as a journalist. You hear about it, but until you're immersed in it, you don't exactly get a complete sense of all of that. The politics comes in hand, of course, because some of the things that you may want to do or attempt to do don't exactly come off the correct way, or you can't get pushed through because of the politics that happens. And then it was mentioned the clearances and the level of things that goes on in terms of trying to get your products, whether it be a press release, speeches, and other things, when you're trying to get them cleared. And there's all the different levels from your immediate groups, and in some cases, depending on the layout of your shop, things that might go all the way up to the department level. When I say lack of, I'm talking about the lack of resources at times. Of course, there's never enough money. At times, there's never enough staff. Sometimes there's lack of training, or even lack of awareness of how public relations is done or public affairs is done the right way. The opportunities do occur at times because there's opportunities to improve your agency's image, opportunities to make a difference based on the work that is done, and you can have a lot of successes. And obviously, part of our job in public affairs is to take those challenges and guide your organization smoothly through those challenges, and or turn a challenge around into an absolute win. I just mentioned salary there. I mean, necessarily in government, depending on how high you climb, you can make some pretty good money. And obviously, I don't know if folks have taken a look at the comparison between what journalists make and what some PR folks make, especially on the not on the nonprofit side, but on the private side. Sometimes there is a greater capacity to earn a much better living. Next slide. So some of the main things that have changed over the period of time since I've been in this business, obviously social media is the big thing. It's a tough competitor. I mean, you almost have to have people that are monitoring your social media throughout the day and into the next day and on, because your issues that you're helping your organization manage just don't, sometimes can change based on something that happens in social media, whether it's a rumor or whether it's a half-truth or the rest. So you just have to be aware of that, and you can't just let it be and just make a few tweets or post a few things and let it roll, because your your constituents will be making comments, as well as those. We're a regulatory agency, so people in industry as well as the general public often weigh in on whether it's our policy or just whatever situation is going on. I mentioned and talk about the near death of the press release, because the press release is still a very standard form of way that public affairs shops across the industry issue information and whatnot. But like we said, with social media, with the advent of blogs and vlogs, use of video and sound, more so, sometimes you really wonder whether the press release is really going to make it. The one saving grace for the press release is, I don't know if it's a comment on our broader society, but most people can't write that well, but they can all read. So those of us who can write a decent press release or string together some sentences, it helps quite a bit. We talk about journalistic quality. When I talk about the ethics, and sometimes I think that the lack of ethics in journalism, nowadays it's hard, as they said, with a lot younger people and the shrinking pool of journalists and the heavier demands that they have. It's hard sometimes to figure out what they're trying to focus on. Oftentimes there are multiple beats, etc., that are taking place, and sometimes there isn't a lot of focus on hard news, or that whole question was raised earlier about exactly what is news, or when do people focus on our particular issues when we need hard news. Next slide. Okay, some of the odds, where we're at odds with journalists, oftentimes deadlines that's come up constantly. As I said, this quote-unquote 24-hour news cycle information, and they expect quotes immediately, or they expect access to your leadership or your subject matter experts immediately, and it just doesn't work that way all the time. Some of the other issues we've run across in recent years with that shrinking availability of media outlets that might properly cover your issues or your topics is you may provide information to an individual who may spend time setting up an interview, etc., and then they take stuff out of context, or they misuse the information to twist it and not keep up with that quality of objectivity that a lot of us old school journalists are used to. Last minute sourcing, I dropped that in because what we find sometimes is that they may have the press release, or they're working on a story that's been pitched by another organization, and in an effort to do their due diligence, they just pick up the phone and say, can you make a quick comment on this particular thing, knowing that their story is already written, or that the issue is just too complicated sometimes to just give a drop of the dime type response, especially when you have clearance approvals there. A lot has been said already talking about building bridges and communications, and regular communications, and having relationships, established relationships with those who are going to be covering your topics and your issues is just key and vital. I think that's something that's really missing in government communications. Time really should be spent on developing those things, and it goes a long way and pays dividends when crisis situations do occur. There are a number of things that we do at FSIS. We do briefings sometimes with other federal partners, whether they be telebriefings and things such as that, on more complicated subjects or on new information and data. That's very helpful to the folks that cover us. And because we regulate plants, there are often times that we take new staff and or members of the Hill and their staffs and other folks on tours of some of these plants, so that they can get a much better understanding of what industry is doing and all that is going into keeping our meat, poultry, and egg supplies safe in this country. Feedback and pushback, that's the whole idea. When they get it right, shoot them a quick email or pick up the phone and say, thanks a lot for the time, the article came out great, and or if they don't get it quite right, they need to know that too, so that they will know where you stand, and that they know that in some cases that they can't just push you around and write anything and don't think there will be any consequences, not necessarily consequences, but will understand that getting it right is so important to the overall success of both sides. And go to the next slide. Go to the next one. And it just goes, lots of this is just common sense. We just have to respect each other's professions and their time, of course. We already talked about maintaining good working relationships, and that's where, as John mentioned, those coffees or lunches or those opportunities when you can meet with these folks on common turf, either in the office or out of your office. Turn PR into people relations is what I like to say. To put the P in PR and make it people, because it all is relationships. You're dealing one-on-one with folks oftentimes. And we can go to the next slide. And some of the quick things, the quick tricks to this that don't make it as difficult, of course, is be accessible. When I say be brief, find out from them really quickly. And that's, as former journalists, we tend to kind of think that way sometimes. We kind of know what they want. As an issue, you put out a press release, you can anticipate, but understand, that they have quick turnarounds. Be accurate. Your credibility is going to be shot if you don't get it right regularly or all the time. And then be gone. Just step back and let them do their jobs. Usually if you provide them with information in a timely fashion, they'll take that, and if it addresses their question specifically, they won't come back with a whole lot of follow-up kind of stuff. And this is just one of those quick things that leads into a statement by Dr. King: our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And go to the next slide. It just speaks to that whole idea of being an advocate for proper communications. A lot of times PR shops are misunderstood. Leadership isn't exactly sure what they do or how they do it. They just know that if something happens, they want somebody to help guide the ship smoothly. So they rely on us. We have to be in that advisory role and deploy tactics that can help prove valuable so that the organization stays and provides the right images. And you have to do that regularly. You have to sit on them and be solid with that all the time. Next slide. And of course, when bad things happen, you don't want to panic. When the big bear is standing over you and about to attack, you can go to the next slide. You really just want to fall back on your planning in a lot of cases. You want to fall back on your planning, and that means everything from like making sure you have standard operating procedures, or how do we handle our day-to-day things, whether it's issuing press releases or monitoring media, and put those best practices into use. And I already kind of mentioned being an advocate. That means just be the voice of reason within your organization. Make sure that when certain issues come up, that you raise the concern of how the public will respond to that, or how Congress may respond to that, or what the reaction will be, so that you're not caught up in the whole situation. Next slide. And of course, just remember, when all else fails, you look at our little friends here, you get put up a shield, because you know the storm is going to come. Try to weather through the storm. Do something that's going to help you relax and regroup, and then get with a good buddy, buckle down, put a plan together, and try to stand tall and be on top once again. And with that, I'll turn it back over, and I think we're ready for questions. Bethany.
We are ready for questions. Thanks so much. And I have to laugh because it sounds like reporters like coffee. It must be that 24-hour news cycle, huh?
Exactly.
Gentlemen, you can all unmute yourselves. Say that again?
I was saying coffee helps in the PR job, too.
Does it? Yeah, I agree with that. I'm a teetotaler myself, but I'm hip to the coffee thing. So yeah, we've got a few questions here. Actually, I have probably a dozen questions myself, but let's go out to the field first. Kelly Woolware asks, what approach have you all used to advocate for enhanced technology use on the PR side or within your agency, so that it can benefit reporters and also your other audiences? I'm not sure who'd like to take that question. Volunteer.
Well, I mean, I'll go because this is Rob. I'll start it off, I suppose, because when I actually, in some senses, I didn't have to. NSF was actually really good before I even came here about tapping into technology. We have a social media coordinator who's constantly looking at what's hot now, what might be hot in the future. So we're looking at Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Instagram, all of the, you can probably name these all yourself. The question has been, how do we use these? And sort of where I've come in on this is not so much on the general media side, the general public side of things, but what sort of tweets can benefit, or tweets or posts or whatever can benefit and reach reporters. And really, the only guidance I've been able to give is this is what's helped me in the past. Those tend to be things that would have been in press releases years ago. The quote from your director, the photo that's free to use, anything. Reporters tend very much to resist any kind of spoon feeding. This idea of, hey, I've got this great story, you should just print it. And so I think, as a lot of experienced professional PR people know, you sort of feed them bits and pieces and allow them to build their own story, supplying them with information and guidance where you can. And I think when talking about new technology, and I'll say mostly that social media, it's finding ways to do that through social media, giving them sort of the building blocks that they can pick up and work into their own narrative.
That's really good, because I've been in situations where I was actually asked to write something the reporter could just print. So that's pretty much the opposite advice. Can you comment on, in terms of social media, what platforms? We've heard a little bit that Twitter is the preferred platform by reporters now, but I don't know if that's your perspective.
I'd say, whoops, sorry. No, go ahead. Oh, no, I mean, I would just say, I'm actually, when I was a reporter until a year ago, I was actually sort of the least Twitter-savvy person in my office. I tended to still like reading sort of longer-form stuff. Reporters, again, tend to be, as a group, very, very into Twitter. Not only because they tend to get a lot of their news from Twitter. You'll have the one person who sort of sticks their head up in a newsroom and says, oh, such and such happened, before it appears on the front page of your favorite news website, because that tends to be the way that that sort of breaking information gets out these days. Also, because sort of a reporter's job these days involves a lot of self-promotion. Reporters, I tend to tell people, you can think of reporters these days as a bunch of free agents rather than sort of signed-on members to a team. If you want to succeed in journalism these days, you're trying to get your name out there, and social media has provided a platform for them to do that, where you're not looking at Rob Margetta from, in the context of Congressional Quarterly staff writer. Like, this is the direct thoughts and feed of Rob Margetta.
And that's true. I mean, that's what we found, is that we tweet, like all our press releases go out via Twitter and things like that. And what we found is Twitter is the journalism area, or the media professional types, are the ones that are dealing with Twitter and whatnot. Facebook, we have Facebook pages. Everybody's got Facebook and all of those kind of things like that. We're actually have put together a new social media team. We're beefing up a lot of our standard operating procedures, especially on the public affairs side. And so we actually put together a social media work group from each of the sections within the Office of Public Affairs and Consumer Education, to look at those places where social media can be more effective. We've also, of course, everybody uses different things to issue their quote-unquote press releases nowadays, but there's various technologies. I think the original question was, how do you advocate for that? Hopefully you have management that can get to, at the department level, or at the undersecretary or secretary's level, to try to push for the need for technology. All of our public affairs folks here, are issued, government issued, Androids or iPhones and things like that. That helps us stay aware. So there's other various monitoring tools out there to monitor social media, everything from Hootsuite to something called, I think, Facebook Insights and things like that. So there are any number of technologies out there, but it really does take time for folks to sit down and say, let's put some heads, some in the IT field, some that are, communications, other communications professionals, to take a look at the social media realm and see where you can expand or expand your footprint in that. We've looked at everything from, how effective is Google Hangouts to even Pinterest. Where should we broaden our footprint in these certain platforms, and where should we not? Where have we been most effective, and try to deploy those strategies.
Rania Botros, you asked a number of questions early in the webinar, and I believe those questions have been answered, but if not, if you want to shoot me another set of questions, feel free. Catherine Stokes asks a real quickie to Rob. What was that Reuters book called, Rob? the Reuters book you mentioned? I think it was Rob who mentioned that.
May have just been talking about the day
Oh,
book.
apologies. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I still have myself on mute. Yeah, I was actually referring to the Reuters and AP have day books, and those are essentially these days. Although a lot of newsrooms have had those deadlines pushed up. Reporters will just get on them and see what's happening, particularly in Washington, over the next week, and they'll plan their
Moderately busy. It just basically lists everything that's going on in the Washington area. And I don't know if you guys have noticed it as well, but if you want a sampling of what the daybook looks like these days and what it entails, you can do a simple Google Alert search for Reuters Daybook, and I've seen some of the Daybook items online, open to the public too. Usually it's a paid subscription service, but I've seen it on Reuters' website, and they'll post items like that. So.
One thing, when you send stuff to them, they want a really basic who, what, where, when, why structure, and don't send it as an attachment. Send it as part of the email, because they just copy paste all that stuff.
Okay, great. So we only have a couple of minutes left in our official time, which is 1 to 2 p.m. So for those of you who have to drop off, I just want to thank you very much for joining us and remind you about our January edition, and also that this webinar will be posted in the NAGC members area as an archive, so you can come back and visit it at any time. But the gentlemen have agreed that they could hang on a little bit longer, so I'm going to field a few more questions from the audience, and those of you who are able to hang on, that would be terrific. John Barico asks, from your perspective, what frustrates you most about working with reporters?
So this is John Poirier speaking. One thing that I've become sort of annoyed, it's a minor annoyance on my part, but one thing that sort of frustrates me is when I get an inquiry from a reporter, and then I answer the question, I think it's over, then I get another one, and then I answer, and then another one, and it's like a constant chain of things when I'm trying to field other reporters' questions, and I feel like many of those questions could all have been posed at once. So when I have to bother a researcher to get some information, I get a follow-up email from a reporter, and I need additional information. If I had gotten a list of questions, if I had gotten a list early on, that would have helped me a lot. But that's it's one of the minor ones.
Yeah, this is Richard McIntyre at USDA. I'm kind of tangential to that, John. I'm with you, man. What I can't stand, really, and it's just been a trend. It doesn't happen a lot here in DC, but it does happen. When people don't even ask you a question, they just call up and ask. I understand USDA did this, or this plant was shut down, or what about thus and such. The lack of proper interviewing skills, or not even posing, 3 decent questions is rather annoying to me. Also, sometimes when they've been researching or working a story, they've called you, they've been well enough to call you and give you a long lead that they're working on this much larger piece for whatever reason. You provide them all this information, and then they still get it wrong. Now, mind you, you know that everything you're going to provide them, they're not going to use in most cases, but it's helpful if and when they can focus, and that's why I try to, when dealing with them, try to have them focus in, focus in on exactly what they're looking for, so that you can supply that. Because if you give too much of a scattershot approach, you're not sure exactly what's going to come out.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I try to.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Oh no, I try to emulate some of the people who I found were fairly successful public relations operatives. When I get someone calling me with a long list of questions, I'll usually say, okay, stop, email them to me, because then I'll have your whole list, and then if it's not what you wanted, I can say, well, that's what you wrote. I think that the thing that probably annoys me is the sort of, and by the way, I have been the reporter who has asked these questions a lot, is the sort of legitimately lazy question, the thing you're asking me a question that was answered 2 paragraphs into the press release, or something like, I gave you a 10-year list of numbers and you're asking me for the average when you could do that with a calculator. Those can be a little bit bad. Again, and I've been that person, so I can understand it. Yeah, that would be it for me.
Terrific. And you know what, that actually brings up an interesting counterpoint. What is it about public affairs when you were on the media side? What did you find to be the most effective behavior by public affairs officers that folks could emulate?
Being responsive, even when you don't necessarily have a response, is always good. You know, there's nothing worse than the guy who keeps you hanging for 2 days. And then sort of has nothing. I think some people in the public affairs world are very good about responding by, first of all, asking what your deadline is, asking specifically what you want, and when you can't make that deadline, letting them know well ahead of time and providing a legitimate enough sounding reason for it. Sometimes you'll get the story held in that case until you can provide an answer. I think that's the best way to not get somebody who is going to be annoyed at you at that point. I found one of the things that coming over to public affairs, I had no idea how hard it was to compose an answer to the question that isn't already pre-written. It involves contacting researchers and then contacting their supervisors and getting everybody to sign off on it. It's a difficult process. I never appreciated that as a reporter. Communicating that in a timely fashion of, like, I know it sounds ridiculous to someone from the outside, but this is going to take much longer than you thought, can at the very least help buy you some time.
Great, thanks. John or Rich?
I guess one of the things that I would say is that one way you can prove your value to these folks that are making these inquiries is if you don't have the answer or it's not, you know, within your agency or something like that, at least send them a link or give them, you know, and send them to the right place. If it's not you, give them useful information to guide them along the way, or get their information and hand it to the person within your agency, or maybe it's even in another department, you know, so that they're not floundering. Because, you know, let's face it, federal government is a huge place. USDA is a huge place. I mean, we get calls here that, you know, there's 12 to 15 different agencies within USDA itself. They may be calling about, they see Food Safety and Inspection Service, so we get all kinds of calls, but it may not be us. It may be another part of USDA, or it may be over at Food and Drug Administration. So just being helpful in that particular way, I think, helps folks along, and helps build that reputation that we really are from government and we can help you.
Yeah, this is John. I found that when I was a reporter, especially when I had a very simple one-off question that I really needed an answer to, I really appreciated some agencies or department spokespeople who would say, "Got your email. I'm checking it out, and I'll let you know as soon as I can." Even if they have no answer for me in the end, it made me feel good that they were trying to get the answer for me. So from this side, whenever I get an inquiry, I do actually reply back to email saying, or even phone calls when people leave a voicemail message for me and I'm not here, or I miss their call. I will actually email them and say, got your message, got your email, checking it out, I'll let you know as soon as I can get it, and I just leave it at that, just to let them know that I'm not hanging onto it and trying to sort of ignore them or anything like that. So.
Yeah, it sounds like responsiveness, which is a good customer service.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm just going to field one more question, even though I've got about a dozen written down. But I know we've got some hangers on, and we've got to go. Last question from the group was: how do you all convince your organization leaders to open up and allow you to release info? If you've been successful at this, can you give us some pointers on how we might be able to take the same approach?
Well, this is Rich McIntyre again at FSIS at USDA. Once again, I mean, in the government structure, I'm not sure, which agency or how, how their shop is set up or where it falls within the chain, but it really does take. There is an influence game that has to take place. You have to have in my case, an assistant administrator push hard on the leadership to understand why certain information should be available this day and time. You're going to have some successes, and it's going to take time. In my presentation, I talked about being tenacious. That's one of those things. We have had success in getting at least certain information, maybe not press releases, but at least certain information is posted online now, where in the past it wasn't. Specific examples of that is we know that a lot of the animal rights groups have been doing undercover video at farms and things along those lines. Every time that one of those would come out, we would get a litany of calls either from the public or from press saying, what are you going to do about it, blah, this, that, and the other. Well, eventually, because of that demand on the public side, and we convinced leadership to start posting when the humane handling violations that take place, where we actually, take enforcement action against companies for egregious treatment of livestock. So it can happen. It does work, and it is helpful. Not only to the public, but it's also, one of the things you can use is that it's a mandate. This administration has said there should be greater transparency in government. So that's another one of those things that can be ticked off. If there's certain information and data that you are producing that isn't readily available, you can figure out how to package it where it makes sense and post it online. But it really is, we're professional communicators, so we have to come up with those tactics and ideas and strategies and align ourselves with people in programs that can carry our messages and can understand why this may be useful to share and carry a broader message.
Rob or John, do either one of you want to chime in on this? Or did Rich pretty well cover it?
Yeah, this is John. So one way, obviously there's always internal tension between you and the leadership and senior management about what you can put out for public consumption and what you can't. And so one of the things that I push for here is sort of it's like a translational approach for me. So we have, because like I said earlier, we have a lot of difficult complex financial research papers that we put out. One way I thought we could try to sort of get it out to the public, we were going to put it out to the public anyways, but one way I thought might be easier for the reporters to consume is if we wrote in a blog kind of style and try to put it in a tone that, as if they were blogging or as if they were writing an email to somebody. And it's been helpful in that sense. And then the other way to release information for us that I've been pushing for a lot is I really do tell reporters that if you have any questions about anything that we're doing, that I will always try to, if I can't answer it for you, or if I shouldn't answer it, I will try to get the researcher, the one who is the expert on this particular matter, on the phone with you and try to have that explained to you. So I feel like we can try to do it in two ways. One is have sort of a translational blog that will help people understand, and then for us to release it to the public. And then the other is to have a phone conversation so that they can they can understand the material better. And I'm actually a really big fan of the phone conversations because in the end, the feedback has been really good from reporters.
Great, thanks so much. Rob, do you want to wrap it up?
Ooh, apologize. I was having a little trouble with my mute button. So, you know, honestly, I was actually sort of taking notes as they were talking. I was going to say I would leave that question to the more experienced hands. But you know, the agency I work for is a little bit different from a lot of them because we have our mission isn't just to talk about our programs, but to actually do some public outreach and teach them about science. And so I think where a lot of our conversations come down to is how do you put out information without sort of leaving yourself vulnerable to any kind of attack or ridicule because you are a government agency in the end. So it's a bit of a balanced test. I think that what's very nice is when you have an administration at your agency that, even if they're not quite sure how to do it, sees the value of public affairs. I think if you don't, and I'm fortunate enough that I do, you might have to sort of convince them that there is value to that kind of outreach.
Great, thanks. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much, and thanks to everyone out there who will be patient enough with us to hang on until almost 2:15. Don't forget, again, the webinar will be available shortly on our archives page in the members site. And if anyone has further questions, feel free to shoot them to me on email, and we will see you guys again in January. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Rich, thank you so much for joining us.
We appreciate NAGC. Everybody should join.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody. Hey, have a wonderful holiday of a great end to the year, and we will see everybody again in January. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye now.
Take care.